Hi everyone, welcome to Cancer Healing Journey Talks. Myself Sonali Modi from Community Outreach Team of ZenOnco.io and Love Heals Cancer. We guide cancer patients on adopting an integrative oncology treatment approach. We help them find the balance between medical treatment and complementary treatment approaches. We help our patients with our team of oncologists, lab experts, nutritionists, and other healthcare professionals so that we can improve the treatment outcome for patients. We also help in connecting patients with other cancer warriors who are going through this journey currently. And we also address queries of cancer patients. So firstly, I would like to introduce you to today's speaker, Ms. Jacqueline Irish. She's a cancer warrior. I'm happy that you're here with us today to share your story. So Jacqueline, over to you. Please start with the introduction.
Well, thank you for having me. So I was diagnosed when I was 41. And I was diagnosed with a early but an aggressive type of breast cancer. So that was pretty alarming to me. For anybody who gets that diagnosis, I'm sure it's a huge surprise. But for me, I didn't have any risk factors other than for breast cancer. I did not have any kids. And so apparently if you do not have children for a woman by the age of 30 or 35, that gives you a higher risk of developing breast cancer. So I was completely unaware of that, but at the same time, my husband and I had struggled with trying to have kids of our own. So that was kind of like, well, geez, you know, it was one thing not to be able to have kids, and then to get breast cancer on top of that, you know, was, you know, a huge surprise.
Yeah. So like, what made you go for the diagnosis and what were the initial symptoms?
So I didn't have any symptoms. It was just kind of a fluke that I even found a lump. And so when I was doing my own breast exam, I did find a lump, and it did feel really different than other types of breast tissue. And so to me, it felt like a rock, and it was probably about the size of a pea, at least that I could feel. And so I waited actually for at least a month or two before I actually saw a doctor about it, just because knowing with women, we have hormones that hugely impact, you know, what we feel and what goes on in our body, whether it's a cyst. So I was kind of just waiting to see if, well, maybe this thing will just shrink on its own just because of hormones. But you know, after a couple of months, it still felt the same, still felt, you know, like this really hard rock. And so I finally made an appointment and had an ultrasound. And it was then at the ultrasound that they right away said, you know, would you mind if we actually did a biopsy? And I was like, right now? So they did it. And so I had this done on a Friday, and then it was Monday that I got a call from the nurse, and she said, you know, your doctor is going to be calling you this afternoon, if that's okay. And I was like, okay. And so sure enough, she called me about 4:30 in the afternoon, and, you know, she told me the news, and I was like, oh, you know, pretty surprised, but that was pretty much it for me. Otherwise, it was painless. So it's just something that, you know, I really advise for women to do the self-exams, because at 41, I had already had a mammogram the year before. And I want to say I may have already had a mammogram when I was 41, but it wasn't caught. So it's really important, I think, for women to do their own exam, because I think you can kind of feel differences in your own breast tissue. And certainly because it was there and it was not caught by a mammogram, you know, I think that's really kind of key. So I would definitely advise every woman out there, do your exam.
To go for self-examinations, because that can ultimately help them to detect this cancer at an early stage.
Yes,
and
sure.
To not ignore their body, because many a times people get so engrossed in their work that they don't take care of their body properly, because in day-to-day life we have our work, we take care of our family, but we don't take care of ourselves. So it's very,
Exactly.
yeah, it's very important to maintain a healthy diet and take care of the body, and accordingly, yeah, perform the right
Sure.
rituals. That's so, like, what was your first reaction when you got to know that you're diagnosed with cancer, and how your family took this news?
Well, at first, I was really quiet. So I had actually had a dinner planned with a girlfriend. And so I got the news when I was actually at a store, and this was right before Christmas. And so my girlfriend and I typically every year we get together for dinner. I had just gotten her a gift, and I got the call at the store because I knew it was coming, and I just walked out of the store and took the call, and it was like, okay. And so I continued to just go have dinner because I didn't want to make any kind of last minute changes or anything, but I didn't say anything to her because I didn't want, the whole tone of dinner to change because of my news. So I went home, and I kind of walked in quietly. My husband was watching television, and so he could kind of tell, but I wasn't in the mood or kind of in the state to really want to talk about it. And so I continued to go just sit in the office and kind of do some Google searches on what I just found out from the doctor. But I was really quiet. And then, I came back out, and, he asked me, are you doing okay? And so it was a lot to take in, for sure. And then I gave the news, I want to say it was probably to my parents first, if not my husband's parents, because I was just kind of thinking, oh, my mom, my mom, like, how is she going to react? So we gave the news to, the immediate families. And then, we sent out an email just asking for prayer, through our church. But, even that is a little bit scary because I think you're basically, when you get that diagnosis, for me, so I got the diagnosis on a Monday, and like straight away, Tuesday, Wednesday, I was getting phone calls, just bombarded to make all these appointments. And I was really overwhelmed. So I think in trying to tell people, it was kind of hard to manage, how many people do you really want to tell? Because, it's big news for you to just absorb and take that. And then, immediately, when the news starts getting out there, people start asking questions. And then before you know it, you've already told the story like 20 some times. And you're kind of tired of talking about it because you're still just trying to, take in the news yourself, on top of setting up doctor's appointments. And, when you go into these doctor's appointments too, I feel like the doctors are really trying to get as much information out to you. And you're told to bring a friend or a spouse, so that when the doctor's speaking, you might get a little emotional and maybe kind of miss what the doctor is telling you. So for me, it's, you're just like information overload, and then you have your emotions, you're immediately thinking, oh my gosh, like chemotherapy, I'm going to be sick. You kind of think the worst at first because it's, you think the C word is bad, right? And I mean, it largely is. However, I think until you become more aware of the information and, some of the things you can do to help, slow things down, or just, help yourself mentally, it becomes a little bit easier. But certainly it's definitely a lot to take in when you first find out.
Yeah. So what treatment did you underwent?
So we immediately started seeing a naturopath. And so he had suggested, eating a clean ketogenic diet. So we started doing that, and wanted to just see what that was going to do, because depending on the type of breast cancer, and at this point, we already just knew it was early. And so I had been diagnosed with actually called a Dcis, which is a stage 0. So with Dcis, there are some women who develop it and it never turns into an invasive type of cancer. So with the diet, we didn't know what type of cancer it was, once you start digging around, because I had what they call very dense breast tissue. And so that makes it more difficult under imaging to see where, a potential lump is, or if there's other areas that could be more invasive. And so just based on that one single biopsy, it was a stage 0. Now, in seeing other doctors, surgeons especially, they were seeing more areas that could potentially be biopsied. And they were basically telling us that, they were highly recommending, like bilateral mastectomy, and then, possibly chemo. It just depends on where, what they were going to find out. So we did the ketogenic diet, and I must admit, because I was this type of person before, I could eat pretty much everything I wanted and not have any, impact to weight or anything. I probably did not dig into this as good as I could have. So, I was eating low carb, but to say that I was in ketosis, how you're actually supposed to do the ketogenic lifestyle, I was probably not there. So we gave it 6 months, and then we did another, we did an MRI, and basically it showed that my little tiny, it was actually the size of like a lima bean. It actually had grown like 25%. So at this point, I thought, okay, let's do the surgery. So I did do a bilateral mastectomy. And the only reason I did that was because I had on both sides just very dense breast tissue. And there's kind of a protocol with every 6 months, you get another MRI, you kind of go through this whole thing. And the more you find more lumps and potential possibilities for high risk for cancer, you kind of go through this drill. And I was just so tired of it. So I just said, take them both, because I only had it in my left breast. And so I could have just removed it. And when you have the one single lump, you can do that simple lumpectomy. But when you have more than that, you're looking at the mastectomy. Otherwise, you're going to have, like a big area that just looks like it's got, a big piece missing. It just doesn't look, normal. So I did the bilateral mastectomy. And then after the pathology, they did upstage me because they found out at the location of a second biopsy, which was benign, actually was really the place of where they had to upstage me, because that's where they found the aggressive type of cancer. So not only did I have that DCIS, stage 0, but now I had a stage 1 aggressive cancer in a different location. So then I was worried, because before this, my doctor said, stage 0, they could just take it out. You may have to do radiation, but just depending on the pathology report of your surgery, they basically said, no, with this aggressive type of cancer that we found in a different area, that's going to really create more risk because it's more aggressive. So they basically gave me a low dose chemotherapy. And so I got the low dose chemotherapy and actually did really good on that. I was only sick once. I did have some other symptoms that most women who take chemotherapy will have, in addition to losing hair, having, I could tell my digestion was more sensitive. My nails, fingernails and whatnot, they became more brittle. I know I had some other like sensitivities, like my skin, if I could just barely scratched it, it could have like almost start bleeding. So basically, just to answer your question, I did have surgery. I did go through a low-dose chemotherapy, and I also was taking tamoxifen, and that was supposed to be for 10 years if you have this what's called a HER2 positive type of more aggressive breast cancer.
So like how many chemotherapy cycles you went through?
I was supposed to have 12 and I only did 10. One time I had gotten sick just before, and this was the only time I really got sick. So I was sick that morning. And basically I went in to, ask them, so am I going to have chemo? And what they did was they just gave me fluids. And then the other time that I missed, my immune system was so low, they basically said, your immune system's too low for us to give you chemotherapy. So I only did 10. And, so they said, that should be sufficient. So that was it. So it wasn't too bad. It was still very difficult. I think just, everything you learn about breast cancer, especially, and I've had, just a couple of friends who've had it, more so co-workers. And I saw, one actually, it came back like 2 other times. So I think that's the biggest fear with cancer in general, is that the side effects of whether it's the chemotherapy, lowering your immune system, leaves you at risk for reoccurrence, or even, just from the toxins and, even the drugs that, like even tamoxifen is a carcinogen. It leaves you at risk for developing some other type of cancer.
Yeah. So like chemotherapy is a very tough routine. So like how you coped with it and what all difficulties you faced during the treatment?
So because I was doing the ketogenic diet, there's been research that if you do some intermittent fasting, just prior to your treatments, that basically it weakens the cancer cells, so that when you go through chemotherapy, it makes it more effective. So I did some of that. So I ate really clean, knowing that the toxins just from the chemotherapy are so strong. It's basically, killing a lot of good cells in addition to bad cells. So I really wanted to make sure that everything else I was putting into my body was, as good as it could be, eating a lot of vegetables, trying to stay away from other things in our environment, whether it's just things we eat, body care products, makeup, the way we cook, the way we, use certain types of oils. I wanted to make sure everything was really clean. And I don't know if you've had many of those you've interviewed talk about coffee enemas. So coffee enemas actually are a way to detox the liver. So in this whole process, it is just like detox, trying to drink as much water as possible, eliminating, anything that could cause further inflammation to my body. What else was I doing? I was drinking what's called SCF tea, which, I guess it was developed. There was a woman who found that I guess certain Native Indians used to drink this concoction, and for some reason, I guess they never developed cancer. There was something to it, but SCAT, if you Google it, you can find it on Amazon. But it's something that I was doing for quite a while, and just really using more natural and holistic therapies. And two, I mean, in seeing the naturopath, and of course I had taken anatomy and physiology like over 20 years ago and remembered that cancer is a problem of the immune system. So you get the diagnosis, I think immediately you start asking questions like, what happened? What caused it? And I did ask my oncologist, I said, for something that small, how long was that there? And he said 5 to 8 years. And so, immediately, I think we all start looking back like, well, what was going on those 5 to 8 years? But then I was like, wait a second. If you remember back to those, anatomy and physiology classes, and you remember cancer is a problem of the immune system. So something was already there to develop this environment for cancer to develop in your body. So, and, in working with the naturopath, because, in many places of the world, and, I think America is just kind of gaining speed in looking at, holistic therapies, whereas like Eastern medicine and, Europe, I think they're so far ahead of us as far as looking at energies and how that impacts our bodies. And so looking at, you have like that traditional list of risk factors, it's like being overweight, smoking, alcohol, all those things. 'Cause, I mean, that wasn't me. I didn't smoke, I didn't do any of those things. But then if you look at the holistic list of risk factors, there's like, for me, I had endometriosis, which was one of the reasons I was not able to have children. So that's a chronic inflammatory condition. And I didn't know that. So, and then I had anxiety, and I knew I had that just from when I was a young child. I had like social anxiety and all these things. Well, guess what? That's also a chronic inflammatory condition. So when you look at holistic medicine and you start kind of stacking up the list, you're kind of alarmed, because I would not be surprised if most everybody probably has like 2 or 3. And so you're basically taxing the immune system. So when you start looking at that, you immediately start looking, okay, how am I dealing with stress? Because obviously getting a cancer diagnosis, that's stressful. So you're looking at, how can I deal with all the emotions that are going on? How can I control them so that I'm not causing more inflammation to my body? Because that is only weakening my immune system even more. And then, you look at all this stuff, the chemotherapy. And so you're trying to limit the amount of stress you're putting on your body. So I think that was largely it. But I think for me, the biggest thing was the toxins, which actually were up here more than anything else. So, that would be something I would recommend to anybody is, if you've got something going on trauma-wise from childhood, take care of all that stuff. So that's kind of, the approach that I took with dealing with it.
Yeah. So how did you manage your emotional well-being during those times?
I really just put my trust in God. My husband and I were believers in, Jesus Christ, and, and just with our church, they became our closest support, because our closest family is probably at least an hour away, and my own family is, in different states than where I live here in San Diego, California. So we just really relied on those that, we saw every week through church, and, through prayer, and I attended a Bible study. So many of the ladies in that group, prayed over me. And so I never felt alone. And I think just through learning about holistic therapies, I think there was just always hope that, the body can heal itself. And, we do a lot of things to harm our body, but we can turn it around so we can, really help it to heal. So, yeah, so again, it was praying. And certainly, I think for anybody who has the initial fear of death, I mean, I think every cancer patient kind of has to come to terms with that. Because I was one of those people that did not want to go through chemotherapy. And so the only reason I did was because in my case, I had a more aggressive type of cancer, and I wasn't sure, how quickly that could progress. While all these lifestyle habits that we could, integrate into our lives, food can be really great. But for everything that we can do, some of those things can be a slower process unless we go like gung ho with every type of method of detoxing. Like there are alternative medicine treatment centers in Mexico. And even in the US, where they do these alternative therapies, and they really help you with some of these more aggressive measures of detoxing your body. But when you're just trying to do it on your own, it can become overwhelming. So I did as much as I could. But again, just from my own perspective of handling my own emotions and dealing with everything, is prayer and support of friends and family, church, and just knowing that, if something did happen, I'm not afraid of dying. But certainly, I just felt there was more hope than despair and everything. So,
Yeah. So, what alternative treatment approaches have you tried?
so I mentioned the coffee enemas. So that is something that, if you went down to Mexico, or you paid more money to do it in the United States, that is something they do. There's also juicing, trying to eliminate some of those more inflammatory types of foods that we might eat. And there's kind of two schools of thought. So our holistic naturopath suggested the clean ketogenic diet. Now there are other treatment centers who will recommend not doing that, but they do juicing with a lot of berries and a lot of antioxidant type foods, which there's nothing wrong with that. Kind of doing something a little bit different, but I think largely they both tout just removing all processed foods. So pretty much like no eating out, no fast food, and really just trying to eat clean. So whether that's taking the clean version of the ketogenic diet, eating pasture-raised meats, wild-caught fish, or taking a hold of the paleo diet. Or I don't want to use the word diet, because really when you get into this, it's not a diet, because it's a huge change, because you're pretty much preparing all your own food. So it's really called a lifestyle change than anything else. So to answer your question, big was diet change. I did the coffee enemas. That was probably the biggest thing. Doing some intermittent fasting. Let's see, I'm trying to think of some other things. If you were down in Mexico, you would probably do like hyperbaric chamber, where they or giving you like pure oxygen and like different other therapies that you could do. But I think for me, I was like the primary cook in the household. So just trying to stay on top of cooking and, doing those things, it can be a lot of work. Um, and, of course, I took a lot of supplements. So that's probably another thing. I think on a more alternative level is I took a lot of detox supplements. This was after my chemotherapy was done. Um, taking a lot of the, vitamin A, C, E, um, what else? A lot of herbs, mushrooms, making sure I took a really good multivitamin. There's so many things actually the naturopath, would suggest to do detox and whatnot. But
Yeah.
so largely food, nutrition with the supplements. So that was pretty much it for me.
Yes. So what do actually people need to expect when they get this cancer type?
You know, I think, there's going to be that overwhelm. As I mentioned, you get the diagnosis. And for me, like I said, I got the diagnosis on a Monday, and then immediately Tuesday, I was getting phone calls early in the morning, as soon as I woke up, to arrange like an MRI. I think I had to get, I want to say I had to get another mammogram. And then to start meeting your whole team. So that's your oncologist, the surgeon, and there's two, general surgeon, and then a reconstructive surgeon. So that was just to meet, the initial team. And of course, if you felt like you had some disagreement with, their style, or just you didn't feel comfortable, then you kind of went through this again with, another group of whether it's oncologists or surgeons, until you kind of felt like they were kind of meeting you where you wanted to go with your treatment, and trying to see if, one had more knowledge than the next, or just really how you felt with them. Because with us having more of a, I guess, a holistic look at how we wanted to go through treatment, when you start bringing up holistic practitioners, that doesn't usually fly too well in a traditional medical setting. So I think that was something that we had to learn. So if someone out there is looking to do more of a holistic or integrative, treatment plan, that's kind of what I did. It's more of an integrative plan. I would just recommend that you kind of be careful in, not using the term alternative treatment. But, I think they kind of maybe take it personal. They're a specialist in their own field. So I think you just really have to kind of watch how you say things. And of course, I think, you could probably bring up certain things and then you kind of find out which ones are more open if you are looking to do a more holistic or integrative plan. So definitely expect the overwhelm, as much as possible. If you have, a good friend or spouse who can attend your meetings, consultations with your team, that's great, because you definitely will go through and they talk about things so quickly. You're trying to remember everything, and then you have a moment where you kind of get caught, like maybe you think you have like an emotional moment, and then you're kind of like thinking about that, and then you miss something. So I would definitely recommend, bring a family member, close friend with you to each of your appointments. As far as, like chemo, it can be different for everybody. Mine tended to be between 2.5 to 3 hours on kind of the shorter end, but there are certainly women who probably with having more advanced states, they may be in there for a bit longer. It just really depends on how your doctor, I guess your cocktail is what they call it, the types of drugs they give you in the chemotherapy. So you might have a friend, visit you. I actually just did a lot of breeding, which was actually kind of nice because there were times where as you start getting through your chemo and you've had quite a few sessions, that towards the end, or depending on the dose of the chemotherapy, you will get more tired. So, I found that unfortunately when my husband would attend my chemotherapy sessions, I fell asleep several times. So, you will become more tired to that. But I think it's just really important to have support through the whole process.
Yes. Support is main. Yeah, everyone
Yeah,
needs
for
support.
sure.
So, and
Yeah.
every crisis in life teaches you a particular lesson. So, what
Yeah.
life lessons have you got from your cancer journey?
Well, I would say that you certainly look at life through kind of a different lens. Prior to that, I was that person who was kind of that perfectionist, kind of, a workaholic. And I think many women, as you mentioned earlier, there's so many women who are out there trying to work, then they go home and they're cleaning and they might be taking care of kids. And, you find self-care kind of falls to the wayside. But after you go through something like this, you really find you do need to take care of yourself. So that, those things that bottom totem pole before is like, becomes really important. So I'd definitely say that my perspective on just the little things, as you go through chemotherapy, when you lose your hair, something really funny is, so when you lose some of your hair, like just nose hair, people take it for granted. We have these little nose in our, the hairs in our nose, but when they're gone, your nose hurts. You don't think about these little things. And so, I mean, that was something I could laugh about. Like, geez, like, when's this gonna? It's something I could joke about, but I mean, you just take the littlest things for granted. So when you go through and like just your digestion, and I like spicy food. So when you start going through chemo, like they warn you about a lot of things. And so if you don't heed the warning and then you try something, you're like, oh my gosh, like something that wasn't hot before, it was really hot. Or I felt like, because of your whole digestive tract, just the way that your cells are killed. So basically, the types of cells that are killed with, obviously cancer cells, but the types of cells that can reproduce really quickly, and that's like your whole digestive tract, you'll find that it becomes more sensitive for sure. But just all those little things you took for granted before, you just like, no, you just think cancer is pretty big business. Don't mess around with it. And, I think those downtimes too, you take getting a cold, you're sick maybe a week and you're down, you're like, oh my gosh, that was awful. But then, you go through chemo and everything about it, physically, emotionally, mentally, that once that storm disappears, you're just like, oh, it's so good not to have to think about it.
Yes, you're relieved then.
Yes, for
Yeah.
sure.
So, how you felt when you first heard that now you're cancer free?
Well, I haven't been exactly told that. And, it's funny because I've had so many friends of mine ask me, have you been told that you're cancer free or in remission? And I'm not at that 5-year mark yet. And I think that's really important because I think what's told of the 5-year mark is really that, when you go into the like a PET scan, for instance.
Mm.
I wanted to get a PET scan, and they told me unless your tumor was at least 2 centimeters large, a PET scan won't pick it up. So my own thinking is this 5-year mark is really important, because if it were to reoccur in your body, it has to grow to such a size that they could even catch it. So I haven't been told that I'm cancer free, and every time I see my oncologist every 6 months, she gives me a list. Do you have any bone pain? Do you have this? How are you been feeling? How's your energy level? So she gives me the list like every time I come. So, I think part of my maintaining, even just maintaining this clean diet, and again, I don't want to say diet, but the way I eat, this whole lifestyle change, it's something I want to maintain, just because I know that breast cancer alone can recur. And, I want to just emphasize too, that because cancer is a problem of the immune system, there was a reason why it became poor. So if it's the risk factors or the toxic thinking, I would just stress that those are things that you have to change, so that there's clearly a difference of before and after, so that it doesn't, reoccur.
Yeah.
So sorry, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. So do you have the fear of reoccurrence? So if you have, then how you cope with it?
The fear of what again?
Recurrence of cancer?
Oh, sure, there is a little bit of fear. I think more of it has to do with the side effects of the drugs. So, when you actually go through, just before you start the chemotherapy, they give you like the long list, and then you have to sign your name, knowing that there's side effects that could potentially lead to another type of cancer. So there is a little bit of fear, but I would say for the most part, I think you just have to have a positive attitude. Knowing that toxic thinking alone is going to create inflammation. And I've already dealt with not having a fear of death. I feel a lot more at peace. So, sure, it could always happen. But that's not something that we want to think about all the time. You know what I mean? I think once you get that diagnosis and then your perspective changes, you really have to embrace life and live in the moment, and not in the fear of the future or dwelling on the past. So I think that's just something that we all have to really just focus on, so that, we stay hopeful.
How do you feel more positive?
I think to tell you the truth, this whole process to me, it was like a catalyst in my life, because 5 years prior to this diagnosis, my husband and I were trying to do adoption. And so we had 2 failed adoptions, 2 failed IVF cycles, 2 failed IUI cycles. So every year was like we got some sort of bad news. And we were actually in the process of trying to become certified to foster children when I was diagnosed. So it kind of was like, this is one more thing that has not worked out for us in trying to plan our family. So when I was diagnosed, it became like this, 180. Sure, no one wants to get that diagnosis, but for some reason, I think, given what I learned through the whole process, it's really kind of turned things around, because I was in design school, and I had to quit design school because we were trying to pay for having kids. And so I've always loved healthcare. And so when I got the diagnosis and started kind of putting all these cookie crumbs together, if you want to call it that, it really kind of, I think, boosted my confidence in looking at something that I wanted to do years ago, work in healthcare. And so here I am. I like study like articles about disease, like how it develops, inflammation, like all these things. And so it's kind of weird how I feel like just getting this diagnosis and what I had to go through made me look at trauma and look at, chronic inflammatory conditions when I didn't think I had any. So I think part of what makes me happy now is I really want to just encourage, advocate, and teach other people that it's, with this whole thing with COVID, it's those who have those underlying pre-existing chronic conditions that usually have, the worst outcomes, right? They get more sick. So the same thing happens when you get that cancer diagnosis. Some people kind of lead up to that with the risk factors. With me, it wasn't. So I think looking at just the toxins alone, and for me, I think, there's certainly toxins in our environment, pollution and all that kind of stuff. But looking at your own thinking, so for me, it was kind of like the light bulb moment. So when you start figuring those things out, I think my happiness has really kind of been like this whirlwind of, the big cloud of every year for 5 years was something that we were like, bad news, another bad news. Like, okay, can we get a break? And then cancer. And then it was like totally different direction. So,
yeah. So how was your life after cancer?
It's an adjustment. I would say that for me, because just going through a career transition, that's been something that's new because I had a degree in communications. So I worked for a healthcare company in marketing communications. And then I went to interior design school and then had to quit. So I kind of felt like, so what am I going to do? I left one field, was trying to get into another one, then got the cancer. And then I was like, well, now what? So for me, it's really kind of focusing on that career transition. So now I'm getting into health coaching. So that's kind of what I'm doing after cancer.
Gratitude seems to be the biggest strength to fight this kind of situation. So what were you ever so grateful for that made you always calm down after thinking or revisiting that memory?
I think just having the gratitude, thinking about all the things, little milestones in your life, when you looked back and you kind of questioned, why did that happen? But when you start looking at, when you start changing that mindset, instead of asking the why question, asking the how question. So in looking at gratitude, when you take the how question, you become thankful for those difficulties and really what you learned, So I think there's so many times where we always ask, why, something bad happens. And then, obviously you can't fix it. So I think, you look at those things that happened, you look at, okay, I used to be super shy, why was I so shy? And, when you start looking at it, so you think of, okay, shyness, I can be grateful that now I feel like I'm a very compassionate person. You know, you take some other thing that happened in your life, you're like, well, why couldn't we have kids? And, you know, you think about maybe the trauma. You know, I learned that I had two different traumas as a child. I didn't know they were traumas, but then you learn that you develop certain coping mechanisms that may have triggered endometriosis. And so, you know, I look at that now and I can say that, you know, I can use that moment as a helping moment for someone else. You know, and I think with gratitude, just the little things, you know,
Be
just,
grateful for the little things in life and keep valuing all the small things.
yeah, for sure. You know, and I mean, just sometimes I feel like, you know, God's out there aligning things up, right? And so when you are at a moment like you're not working, maybe you're sick, and like you're doing all these, you know, holistic therapies at home, and you don't have time to do like the normal things that people do. You know, I wasn't working, but you know, it's like it kind of really forced me to slow down. You know, like you said, it's the little things.
Yeah.
I used to be this person, you know, we have dogs, and I'm usually like a really fast walker. And my husband's always like, why don't you just slow down and smell the roses, right? So when you learn to be in the moment, you're grateful that, you know, when you're walking the dogs, you can hear the birds, you know, you can watch the squirrels and, you know, pay more attention to the things you're doing in the moment. You know, and it is, you know, when you do slow down, I mean, granted, I still kind of walk fast, but when you're tired because you've been through chemo, like you literally get tired to the point where you feel like you need to get to bed like within like 15 minutes, otherwise you're going to fall asleep in a chair or something. So I think it's just those moments like you don't know when you're going to have the opportunity to, you know, to have this again, you know, whether it's you're tired or you're knocked out because you're not feeling well from chemo or whatever. But yeah, you certainly don't take those little things for granted. But
God always has better plan for their kids.
yeah, and I think you have to remind yourself too, because they, you know, me looking at a career transition, and anybody like just out there in the normal, you know, not dealing with cancer treatments or anything like that, you know, everybody's got work, you know, you might have kids, and you're pulled in so many directions that you could easily just fall into the same routine, right? So I think we all just have to remind ourselves, you know, there was a reason I got cancer, and I can't fall into the same routine. I have to do different things. And certainly I think practicing gratitude and mindfulness so that you're just always trying to focus on one thing at a time. Not trying to be everything to everybody, but just try to slow down and enjoy the moment.
Yeah. So what would be your message to cancer patients and caregivers?
You know, I would really just say that the support system is huge. You know, and more people you can involve in that. Because I certainly I wasn't, you know, as sick as some people get, but I know that in speaking with other caregivers, you know, especially if, you know, it's a spouse or something, that the caregivers need to also have a time of rest. So if they can take turns, I think that's helpful. But you know, listening to your body too, I would say, as either the one going through cancer or just the caretaker. Sleep is so important. So I would say, you know, make sure that if your body feels tired, you need to listen and, you know, take that time to rest, to And I mean, your body is trying to digest and also heal when you sleep. So that's something else I would just say, make sure you get plenty of rest, sleep proper, 7 to 9 hours. But involve those people you trust, close friends, family members, so you feel like not just one person's maybe having maybe the burden, if it's whether it's cooking or helping you if you're sick all the time. My husband, for me, because I was overwhelmed, he did a lot of research, so that I think was relieving, that I didn't feel like I had to go through the treatment, set up appointments. I had a coordinator who scheduled all of my appointments after I got got things set up. This person would help me with making appointments, so it wasn't so overwhelming. But I would say that, if you have a friend or spouse that either goes with you to the appointments, but is helping you kind of do some research, because, you certainly get some information from your doctor, but if you're going more of a holistic route, there are so many things you can look up, and there's so many books out there, I think just helping you out and getting that support,
Yeah.
everybody.
So ZenOnco.io works towards the betterment of cancer patients through integrated oncology. So what do you think about the work we are doing in terms of patient care?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question again?
So what do you think about ZenOnco.io, what we are doing in terms of patient care? What is your opinion?
I think it's great. I've watched several of the videos, and I think it's just really encouraging that there are other people out there who are going through the same thing, whether it's the same type of cancer or a different type of cancer, because I think we all have that initial startling thought is, death, chemotherapy, you know what I mean? So you're kind of flooded with that initial thinking. So I think, what you guys are doing is really just giving people some hope with just the support that, there are people doing other things in addition to what typical treatment is. So if it's integrative, I think it can be a stepping stone. There's a lot of people that they are not exposed to, what is possible until they get a diagnosis. But I think as you start kind of talking about it, people share more, and it's not quite as scary. So I think it's really great that you guys are doing this.
Yeah. So if you have to sum up your journey in one sentence, then what would that be?
It's certainly a journey, of course. It's probably like unlike any journey, probably because it involves so much of your emotional, mental, and physical all at once. So in that respect, things we do through work, it might be mentally taxing, or just taking care of family, that could be physically taxing. So it's hard to say, but it's definitely life-changing. I'll say that, but it doesn't have to be it's life-changing, but I'll say that it's also like life-changing for the better. So yeah, some big learning moments come through cancer diagnosis. So yeah, life changes for the better.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your valuable time, Jacqueline. I hope the session really motivates people out there who are traveling or who have traveled through this journey. So it was lovely having you here today on this session with us. So once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. No, just it was awesome that Dimple was able to reach out and ask me. So I just thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you.